I was watching a pitch on Shark Tank, kind of screaming at the screen, so much so that I startled my wife.
Something like entrepreneurship can be made mainstream. It's very good for development of the country itself. You have to be eyes and ears open, close to the customer, and hear them out, read them between lines. That's how Intervue actually happened. Here, as a founder, you have to make sure that how agile can you make your team so that they keep rolling out features for you as fast as possible.
Now is the time for the Indian entrepreneurs to sort of take the world stage.
100%.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Startup Operator podcast. We're back with another Shark Tank founder, and this time it's Rahul of Intervue. Some of you may have seen his pitch on Shark Tank, certainly one of the more interesting ones, I should say. And I talked to him about that experience. What are the sharks like in person? His interaction with Aman, Deepinder, and so on. And also about how he's building his business, some of the challenges in the 0 to 1 to 10 journey. How he's thinking about expanding globally, what he's doing to sort of hedge against this whole cyclical nature of the recruitment business, so on and so forth. This was a fascinating conversation, a lot of wonderful insights in here for folks who are interested in building and scaling. So I hope you like it. Hey Rahul, welcome to the Startup Operator podcast. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, I was just telling you that, your idea was one of those ideas that it's like hiding in plain sight, right? Because I was watching a pitch on Shark Tank and I just was kind of screaming at the screen, so much so that I startled my wife, right? That this is exactly the problem that I see all around that nobody is kind of solving. But we'll get to the nuances of your business, the product, and so on and so forth. But before that, what was your Shark Tank experience like?
I think it was pretty good. During the last 3 years of being a founder, I have pitched Intervue in front of everybody, be it customers, investors, and when it comes to investors, multiple investors as well. But this was different because it was in front of the cameras, and the entire country would see it. So you just have that one chance to put Intervue, make sure you articulate Intervue in the right way. So it was good. It was very, very different. It was a lot of pressure as well, I would say. And I would say something that was taken casually initially, but when I entered the tank and how it was pretty real, and got into that pitch mode, and there were so many cameras shooting, so high adrenaline, I would say.
Awesome. Yeah, we've had Shark Tank founders on the podcast earlier. We've had GD of VS Money.
Okay.
Of course, I spoke to Vinay of Stage before Shark Tank, but he went on Shark Tank as well. Then we had Ravi of Five Mums as well. It's quite an experience for sure. There's nothing quite like it. And, I've been with startups for almost 15, 16 years now. And I think I should credit like Shark Tank for making startups mainstream, right?
Yeah.
It's living room conversation today.
100%. I totally agree. I think India is a Bollywood loving nation, has been a Bollywood loving nation. And I really think that if something like entrepreneurship can be made mainstream, it's very good for development of the country itself, right?
Yeah.
And more people would want to become entrepreneurs early in their age itself, want to learn more about entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
And I think they're doing a great job as a show.
Yeah. I think in this, I kind of echo what Anupam of Shark Tank says, right? That Indian engineers have shown the world that they can build and sell high-class products, right? I think now is the time for the Indian entrepreneurs to sort of take the world stage.
100%. Yeah. I mean, not just from main metro cities.
Yeah.
I've seen startups coming from very small cities as well. I personally, I belong from Ludhiana, which is I would say tier 2 or tier 3 city. I've seen startups coming out from Karnal, startups coming out from very small cities as well and making it big.
Yeah.
So I think Shark Tank is changing the way Indian youth is thinking. So I think a pretty good show, good format from that perspective.
For sure. Can you give us a glimpse of what goes on behind the scenes? how are the sharks like in person, right? Do you get to chat with them before you pitch, or what happens after that? If you can just take us through like pre-event, and then at the shoot, and then post that, what happens?
So there's no shark interactions with the shark before the pitch or even post the
So
pitch,
all
right?
of the
So
surprise that we see and all of that stuff is genuine, right?
it's all real. You see the sharks for the first time. They see you for the first time. They don't
Right.
know anything beforehand.
Awesome.
So that's there. Behind the scenes, the only 1 minute 45 seconds or 2 minutes of the pitch that every product founder does. I think that's the only part that they go prepared with. Everything else is a natural exchange of information. It's a discussion. So that's how it is. And sure, I mean, if you are selected for Shark Tank, they call you to Mumbai in Film City. The shooting happens and everything. But the first couple of days is to just to make you attuned to how it is going to be. They don't take you inside the tank. They'll just give you an overview that you'll go inside the tank, stand there and give your whatever pitch and discussion. But you just prepare that 2 minutes. That's about it. And everything else is your preparedness that you have done before Shark Tank itself, right? As a founder. So that's how Shark Tank is. It's as real as it can get. So yeah.
Awesome. So what was the reaction of your family and friends and so on once the episode aired? Because you seemed like really confident, right? And I mean, my favorite section is where Vinita is asking you a question and then Aman is kind of looking at her, smiling that this guy knows the answer to that. He's just waiting for you to finish the question. Right?
Yeah,
so,
I mean, first of all, my family reaction. My family did not know what Shark Tank is. So
right.
Yeah, my parents. I told them that I'm going to be on this show called Shark Tank. Most likely going to be aired. So they said, "What is Shark Tank?" They don't watch that, and then I told them that it's a TV show. So they were very happy that I'm going to come on TV. So my mother watched that clip, I don't know, maybe 100 times. She was pretty emotional.
Awesome.
My dad was proud. It's being parents. So that's how it was. But I think how the whole pitch went. So my pitch was 1.5 hours. The whole discussion. So
which they edited down to about 15 minutes or whatever.
Yeah,
right?
18 minutes
18
precisely.
Minutes,
yeah. But in those 1.5 hours, I remember, raising my hands multiple times like this. Hey, I know the answer. Let me answer. And they were discussing amongst themselves that this kind of an idea where someone else is coming from an industry and taking the interview, etc. And my hand was like this all the time. So during the course of it, Aman was like, "Tu hi de de sare answers." That's why they edited that portion and it came out like that. So
right, awesome. Yeah. So finally, you decided to take Aman's offer.
Yeah.
So have you been chatting with him after that? And did you go in with a sort of a mindset as to which shark would be the perfect person for you? And then how do you see that relationship kind of growing?
I mean, there are asynchronous communications now started with Aman and team, but I did not go with that mindset. Honestly, which shark to get? That was not the intent at the first place. The idea was ultimately my idea was that can I get all of them? Or the idea was just to articulate interview at the first place. I was not thinking about funding itself per se. So I think from that perspective, I think it played to our favor only. Yeah.
So folks, if you're watching or listening to this podcast, you should definitely check out the interview episode on Shark Tank. It's fabulous. I mean, truly like one of the more interesting ones that I've watched for sure. And I've binge watched pretty much all of the episodes at this point, right?
Thank you. I think you're too kind.
No, it's my favorite, I will say, right? So top 3 along with the Jugadu Kamlesh one for sure, right? So,
okay.
Yeah. So let's get down to the problem that you're solving with interview, right? And like I said, I mean, I think it's one of those problems that's so obvious, that's hiding in plain sight, that you wonder why there aren't like 4 or 5 other solutions for this, right?
Yeah.
Talk about, you being an engineering manager, seeing this problem firsthand, and then deciding to build something like this, right? So how do you go from idea to product to company?
Got it. So when I was an engineering manager, we were taking a lot of interviews, hiring for more than 200 plus folks. And my weekends would go into interviewing, weekdays would go into building the product because it was the need of the hour. And it was my team itself that I was building. So, I had to show up on the weekend to take weekend drives. But, when after a month, when we were gauging how many candidates actually made it to my rounds and how many got selected, there was an escalation that happened in my company. And they said, Rahul, maybe you're rejecting candidates left, right, and center because my selection ratio was 1 in 30. And 30 candidates who would come to my round, and I would take the final rounds almost. I would only send one ahead. And they were like, what's going on? Maybe you're just rejecting people. And I was like, the sourcing quality means candidates who are actually coming to my round, they're not up to the mark. And maybe that needs to be improved. And, the HR team had no clue. They said, we never got this as a feedback. And the problem actually now that we were able to narrow down to was engineering team, after taking interviews, they don't submit a detailed parameterized feedback, which cannot be done also because they don't have time. They'll hop onto another call after taking the interview round, right? So it became a big problem. And I was like, oh my God, HR team does not even have a feedback loop. And my engineers are spending maybe an hour and a half interviewing a candidate and ultimately rejecting them. So, and there are so many hours that are going into it. So that was the first, big thing where we thought maybe, a product is needed. Before that, we would send assessments to a candidate, which offline tests that they would do. And we would get a lot of applicants online and a lot of companies that would support us in getting applicants as well. We call them third-party vendors.
Right.
We used to get a lot of applicants from them. We used to think that if they have crossed a test, a written test or an online test, they might be able to crack the interview round. But surprisingly, if 10 candidates would cross an assessment stage, 9 out of them would get rejected in the interview stage. So the both kind of did not complemented each other. And we thought, what's even happening? Now, by the nature of the product itself, the nature of how assessment as a product is, it allows you to have an environment where you can fool around the system, you can cheat the system. There are 10 different ways to cheat, right? And I can go to ChatGPT today and ask ChatGPT simple question, it'll give me the answer, and I can pass that written test.
And it's only going to get easier and easier.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And then, interview is the real test where whether can you clear the interview round or not. And I was like, this problem is anyway going to increase even with AI tools in place, right? And we thought the first year was, we never thought that we'll get interviewers on board to take interviews. We thought, let's build a software to take interviews. This software, what it'll do is normally if on a Zoom or a Meets call, I'm taking an interview around in 1.5 hours, can this software bring it down by 30-40%? And how we would do that is by bringing all the tools to take an interview under a single roof. And it would have a code editor, compiler, way to run the code, see the output, way to see if the candidate is trying to cheat the system as well. Everything baked in, right? We launched that software. We had about first year 30 to 40 customers. All of them said, Rahul, we don't have bandwidth to interview. And this is where I tell everybody that you have to be eyes and ears open close to the customer and hear them out, read them between lines. And that's how interview actually happened. And we built a marketplace of interviewers around our core product to take the interviews. Yeah, so that was the whole thing.
Oh, so you start with the software first, right? And then added the whole marketplace element afterwards, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think recruiting in general, right? I think it's one of those easily defined problems, but so hard to solve, right?
Yeah.
Because I see that function of, primarily sourcing and assessment.
Yeah.
Sourcing ka, I don't think you can do much, right?
Yeah.
And the supply is what it is.
Yeah.
Really. So the assessment part where you identify someone who's relevant to you, and particularly, maybe someone who is overlooked by your typical parameters, that is where the biggest alpha is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I really think sourcing today is done by a lot of platforms. If I were to name some of them, maybe LinkedIn, Indeed, Naukri, any other job board for that matter. LinkedIn being a social media platform, you can source from there as well. But I really think if you're sourcing, you don't have a way to tell if the candidate is actually good or not. Because today, most of the sourcing is you typing in skills, doing a keyword search, and shortlisting a bunch of candidates. So
and everyone looks pretty much similar to the other, right?
Correct, exactly. Yeah. So and today, I can literally on this podcast as well create a prompt, go to ChatGPT, and I can ask ChatGPT to create a perfect online profile, and it will do that. A recruiter sitting in any company would shortlist that profile and say, "Oh, look, I found a perfect candidate." Candidate might totally have a fake profile at the end of the day. So the problem is ever increasing. So the real alpha is that can you accurately test a candidate and tell whether they are good or not, and nothing becomes closer or more accurate to testing a candidate than an interview round, a real interview round in a real environment. So that was the objective.
Right. So this whole building that marketplace element as such, right? How did it come together? I mean, I'm sure that, when you kind of suggested this to the team, even though it was like, let's say an organic thing, right? That people were actually saying that, this was a problem. It might have been a deviation from what you originally conceptualized this as, right? Which is
Yeah.
like a software company. Hey, we're in bits and bytes ka business, right? We're going to sell product, not necessarily, have that whole people element to it.
Yeah. So I'll tell you how it. So when a lot of companies started to come and say, Rahul, can you give us interviewers who can come and take the interview round on behalf of us? We don't have time to interview because there are so many candidates that we are rejecting, and we would rather want our team to focus on the core. My idea was, if I start giving them interviewers, this will become an operationally heavy company, and I don't want to build one. This is how I thought about it.
Yeah.
And I had this fear that there are so many moving pieces when you build an operationally heavy company that if you don't get that right, your entire company, you'll be digging your own grave.
Yeah.
Right. So that was the whole thing. But that thought did not leave my head. I kept whiteboarding, kept scribbling around 2 to 3 months, subconsciously thinking about the whole idea. And to a point where I had whiteboarded the whole journey of the idea, if I were to ever implement it, before I actually went to the team with the idea. Now the idea that was not ready to leave my head was, can this be a paradigm shift? Like, can I make interviewers who are taking interviews for free get used to the fact that now they'll be paid for every interview? And because
can I build an incentive in that, basically.
Yeah, I mean, if an interviewer can make money out of interviewing itself, it will be a huge category generating product. Not only that, it'll bring about a behavioral shift which can't be reversed. Because now suddenly if you've taken like 100 odd interviews and you have paid for, you made let's say 2 odd lakhs, if somebody asks you to take an interview for free, you won't do it. And that is what did not leave my head. And I was like, if this can become a paradigm shift in the world, a company can become so credible, which is sitting on data of millions of candidates that they have interviewed, and they can change hiring forever. And that did not leave my head, and that is what forced me to execute the whole thing.
So I'm sure that you would have pitched it to the first person that you thought would be most likely to sort of bite into this, right? What was that reaction like, right? How do you process it, and how do you actually convince people, or did it take a lot of convincing actually, right?
I think the first customer was very easy to get. But when we started building a GTM itself around it, that was very hard.
Yeah.
So the first customer was Upstocks. They came in. They came on board very early. They said, we have a weekend drive to take. Can you take like 80 odd interviews, 80 to 100 odd interviews over a Saturday for us? It was pretty easy to do. I got like 20, 30 interviewers to take interviews for Upstocks. They were pretty good. They are all my friends. This is how it all started. They're all working with top-notch companies. And the drive was, I would say the success rate of the drive was 90%. And we were like, oh, this is that movement. And
when you say success rate, I mean, you mean...
This is where we interviewed about 80 candidates from Upstocks, gave 8 yeses. Out of the 80 that we interviewed, 7 were offered.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then imagine Upstocks now only had to interview 8 candidates as opposed to 80.
Right.
So interviewing 8 candidates happened over the period of next couple of days when we gave the shortlisting, and Upstocks rolled out 7 offers.
Right.
And we were like, okay, maybe this is cracking the market. And Upstocks paid us good amount of money for that. And then we started replicating the whole model. But when we started replicating it, a lot of problems came in. I remember talking to a lot of engineering folks from the country which said, oh, you know what? My interview process is my baby. Why should I give it to you? You are telling me that you will do a better job at interviewing than my own engineers. I mean, lots of, I would say rebuttals were there. We had to convince a lot of people, even educate them on the overall idea. Even educate them on the overall thing that your candidate itself who's getting interviewed by a third-party engineer the third-party engineer will not poach your candidate if they like your candidate. So the whole thing, and we have to build a lot of guardrails around it. And educate through content, etc. So the first year was, I would say, as easy as it was to reach 1 million, it was very, very hard to educate the customer itself.
Yeah. So I mean, I want you to like zoom out a little bit on this context and just what are the things that you did to sort of standardize a GTM around it, right? Because again, this is a solution that doesn't have a comparable. Like no one's really searching for it out there. That mujhe interviewers chahiye, aise, right? How do you build a GTM around this?
I mean, I'm not sure if I can tell everything, but there were certain, you can still draw parallels with people who are looking out for assessment solutions. And can we now go to them and tell them that we are here to bring you more accurate assessments, which are exponentially better? And how we do that is, I would simply ask them, what is your hit ratio with the assessment? They would say 1 in 10. I would say, what if I give you a product which has 7 in 10 hit ratio? One of the things, right? That's how we started educating them. Second way was, literally going outbound and telling them the idea that, and the core value prop itself, that I can accelerate your hiring. You don't have so much panelists. I'll get you panelists who are equally trained. But, when you're talking to engineering managers, they want to see substance more than just talking, right? So one thing that was baked into our product itself was our product that we had made, but the data that surrounded the product, data around recruitment. For example, today, if you have to hire an Android engineer, I can show an Android engineering manager 20 different parameters on which that Android engineer should be assessed. And those parameters do not exist in their own organization. And that is where the win is. That is where the moat is. So it took us some while to build those, but that is how it was. So initial GTM strategies were all around, going to players where they were using assessment products, but might not be working for them. They were they wanted to hire faster. But they had the initial team that they wanted to make sure the team was focusing on product, and they bought the assessment products for that only, so that their team do not have to screen so many candidates, but it was not working out for them. So
this is such an important lesson in there, right? I mean, because often people get hung up about the differentiation because they think that is the secret sauce, right? And they go on about it and then wonder why people are not really catching that, right? But rather what I feel is like, find the closest proxy to that, right? Which could be in your case, like, improving assessments and so on, right? And treat the secret sauce as what it is.
I love what you said, actually. As a mental model, can you find something in proximity? And we follow this rule everywhere. If I have to hire the next person in my team, I would see what is the closest in proximity. If I have to launch the next product feature, I would say what is the closest in proximity, rather than completely going 90 degrees tangent. I won't draw that. I would say I would rather follow a graph way to look at it. Go closer to the proximity and crack the problem. I think that's the right way. Whenever you are clueless about it, proximity rule works really well.
Absolutely. Let's talk about a few more of your of the challenges you kind of encountered in the 0 to 1, right? Obviously executing in a space where there were no similar comparables, maybe one, right? Anything else that you could think of in the 0 to 1 and how you kind of overcame it?
Well, it was pretty hard. When we launched the software itself, a lot of people did not want to onboard the software because they were like, okay, sure, the value prop is there, but we have Google Meets and we have Zoom.
There's a bit of
we have Teams.
Like fatigue, right? I mean, again, like there's a bit of one more tool, one
tool
more technology.
to take video interviews, or we have Office Suite, we have Google Suite.
Yeah.
Why would we onboard your tool? So we had to build a lot of things around it just to make sure product is better. But to make an exponentially better product, it has to add exponentially better value as well. So one of the things that we learned in the very first year was just stay closer to the customer, develop with them, because that is how it is going to be. 0 to 1's journey had more challenges, especially the first year. Team building was a big challenge. We were only a team of 2, me and my co-founder, and we were building the whole product. So it was very hard to convince somebody to join a 2-people company. And my style of hiring is, I would never tell them that we raised a seed fund, etc., etc. My style of hiring rather is that, can the person come for us?
Are you excited by the problem and the people?
Are you excited by the product that we're building, the vision? Because if they're coming for the funding, etc., they might not stay for that long.
It's the wrong motivation.
Yeah, correct. So it took us some time to do that. And I also found out that early stage startup hiring is nothing but selling. So I mean, you sell a product that does not exist. You sell a team that does not exist that you will build. You sell a culture that they will come and build, right? So you have to articulate it right. So that first year was all about that. First year was also a lot around making sure that can we iterate fast. I think that's very important. A lot of people, and I've met a lot of people from very strong backgrounds, but they are not able to launch their product on time. And when I say iterating fast, it's not just launching the product. It's about getting that feedback loop from the customer ready, implementing that feedback, and making sure feedback is launched, the feature is launched that was needed, and then measuring, and then continue to repeat the cycle. How now here as a founder, you have to make sure that how agile can you make your team so that they keep rolling out features for you as fast as possible. And that is when, with every new feature, customers will give you more insights, and you will eventually, increase your chances of going to a PMF. So I think, first year was all about that. It was a pretty hard year, but and we worked more than 17, 18 hours every day as well. But very, very crucial year for our foundation.
Yeah, yeah. In this 1 to 10 sort of a journey that you're in, right? I mean, they typically call it like the valley of death in SaaS terms, right? I mean, a lot of folks kind of stagnate for a variety of reasons, right? Maybe they don't have PMF, and, PMF, again, as you mentioned, right? I mean, maybe last year may not be the right comparison, but otherwise, I mean, there was a point where funding kind of made it look like someone had PMF, but it wasn't the case, right? And today we are kind of seeing whether whether there's a reality on that front or not, right? Again, actually on that specific point on PMF, right? How do you kind of look at it? Because I'm sure that you're adding layers to your product and so on and so forth. Right? You start off with one thing, then you added the whole marketplace thing. Then I'm sure that you're standardizing a bunch of things around, let's say, interview parameters, so on and so forth. Maybe the next 18 months you'll add something else and so on. So how are you measuring PMF relatively?
So I think it's an ever evolving definition, honestly, depending on the stage you are in. But at the initial stage itself, I would say, do you sort of have a crazy pull where customers are asking for more? Now,
how much of your product roadmap is being defined by your customer in some sense?
Maybe you can define it like that. But here's what I told one of my teammates. Like, if your customer is using your product and they're cribbing about it, that does not mean they don't like the product or your product does not have PMF. You have to read between lines. They're cribbing because they want more. That means your product has hit something well.
Absolutely.
And you need to understand that. So if that you can replicate that across multiple customers and you start to get a pull, can you now replicate that pull in terms of revenue? And that's when I think, and it's a crazy pull. It's not like one or two customers have said it and you would call it a PMF. No, it's not. It's like a crazy pull where you're continuously, you made one phone call, your first sale happened. And now you're able to replicate the same thing, let's say, across the next 50. And you're able to, and again, this 50 is not a magic number. It depends on what ticket size you're selling, what sort of revenue you're doing, what sort of model you're in. So many factors are there. One thing that is going to be common is, do you have that pull from the customer? That's what I would define as a PMF.
Right. Yeah. And, you achieve PMF in stages, right? I mean, as you mentioned, it's kind of a continuous journey, and this is kind of affected by the externalities also, right? I mean, the industry, the market in which you operate, and how that context changes as well. So in this 1 to 10 journey, I think the other thing that becomes important also is that, these different functions kind of develop by themselves, right? I mean, we're speaking about like setting up a marketing function, for instance, right? Or setting up your own HR and TA sort of a function and so on. When you go from, okay, you know what, let's just hire this one person to solve that, to actually thinking that, hey, I mean, you need a function, right? Not just a person. How are you thinking about that?
I think it's very important. I think it depends from company to company. For our case, I think when as a founder, you can't do everything. I tell everybody that you are as good as your team. Even if you are a great founder, you have an average looking team, you will be an average. You'll have an average outcome. So in that particular case, I think it's very important to have a function replace you, do a better job than you, and you can further power it with OKRs and KPIs, right? Which you can track their performance. And I would say, you rightly said that one person versus a complete function, where can you build a flywheel around the things that you were doing alone, or maybe with one person yesterday? Can you build a flywheel around it tomorrow? And what kind of team members do you need? And that is where I really think early stage startup hiring is very, very crucial, because depending on who you bring on board, not only impacts your runway, they impact your growth as well. And I tell everybody that you should bring in high agency people high agency has a very fixed definition, that people who can take charge without being told to take charge. I think in a startup that matters a lot. And the way I look at the framework is, if you bring in that one high agency people who can come and lead that function, that high agency person will bring in more high agency people. That's one. But if you have in one function, depending on the team size, especially let's say you are in your 1 to 10 journey itself early, and you're just starting from that one. Initially, if you have within one functional role, if you have 2 or more high agency people, I think that team is going to kill it.
Absolutely.
So that's how I look at it.
So I have a sort of a simple razor that I measure this whole scaling journey as well, right? I personally feel if you have 2 functions, right, that are phenomenal, right, the rest of them just catch up.
Yep.
Rest of them catch up to that level,
Yeah.
right?
Benchmark is made.
Benchmark is made because oftentimes what happens in most SaaS firms that you see, especially in this 1 to 10, is there's one function that's kind of taking the load for everyone else, right? Whether it is product saying, boss, I mean, I've shipped so much and go and sell, right? Or sales saying, hey, we've committed so much and where the hell is the product, right? So in those situations, I mean, it becomes like as though, all the great work is getting cancelled out.
Yeah.
But if you just have 2 functions, right, that are like kicking ass, I mean, the rest of them just like kind of catch up. Very rarely I've seen like, some other function will screw up to that extent ki like, this will go berserk. But even when that happens, right, you as a founder have an objective reality that, hey, these guys are here.
Yeah.
Why is let's say HR or TA or somewhere where it is?
Your viewpoint and your comparison point changes, right?
Absolutely.
I think you mentioned it right. I remember the second year of Intervue, and we almost were about to hit 1 million, and it was going so fast that we were closing deals left, right, and center, and that's what actually PMF looked like for us. But when we were closing those deals, I remember our engineering team was so pumped up because the sales team was just killing it, right? And it was a very lean team. I was in the sales team. There were a couple of more folks, and they were just killing it. And I remember, engineering team won't go home. They would just sit there, release features because they were like, okay, we are going to build something that, because it is happening so fast that, they won't go home. They would just continue to iterate on features, make it better. They would come in with more recommendations. And you rightly pointed out that if, you have 1 or 2 functional roles performing at that level, that benchmark is already set. And for early stage startups, because the visibility is only across so many people, people have a reference point and they start upgrading themselves.
Yeah, because then it's about pride, right?
Yeah.
Then it's about like, hey, what is the kind of impact I'm having?
Yeah.
And that's just a different trip by itself, right? I mean, it's not people who are just clocking in the hours to do some work and then get a paycheck at the end of the month.
Yeah.
Those are like, I mean, at that time, I mean, the high is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Intervue obviously is going to be global, or I'm sure that you might have had interest globally as well, right? And I think, I don't know, Deepinder or someone mentioned this on Shark Tank also. I think even Piyush also kind of agreed that obviously, I mean, if it can work here, I mean, technical is such a thing that it can work globally as well, right?
Yeah.
What are you doing to kind of scale globally?
So I think hiring parameters do not change. That's the best part about it. Even if I'm going to Australia today or New Zealand tomorrow or US, hiring parameters to interview a front-end person or an Android engineer or an iOS developer would stay the same. And because if you see why it is so, if you see it principally, most of these frameworks, these new languages are developed by the top tech companies, the big tech companies, right? And then remaining companies just adopt, use it, and they hire talent corresponding to that. That is why, the parameters don't change. That is why if your product basics around those parameters are the same, you can easily scale. There are different challenges to it. I think scaling Intervue globally has other set of challenges. I think the kind of problems India has, US as a geography does not have those sort of problems. Maybe Australia as a geography and Europe as a geography.
Can you define that a little bit more? I mean, I want to double click on that specifically because the way I would look at it is that if interview time here is scarce, it must be like a lot more scarce with a country that is 1/4 our size.
Correct. Right? I mean, that's one way to look at it, but the other way to look at it is also that US is pro productivity. And if you see the number of productivity tools that actually have a good product adoption in US versus India, you'll see an exponential difference. US is way ahead right now even in adopting productivity tools today. So they are pro productivity as a workforce, right? So that is where I think Intervue does have a strong moat. But if I tell you more about why US has very different problems as compared to India. India has this offer to join ratio, which is like horrible, right? And if you talk to bigger companies, they would also say, oh, you know what, 30% of the candidates are declining. If I go to companies, brand names are not very well known in the market. Yeah. I mean, they are sitting at, if they would offer 10 people, only 3-4 would join.
Yeah.
It is that bad. US does not have these problems.
I think second only to maybe like a customer churning, I think would be like a great candidate, ghosting you.
Correct. I
Right?
mean, that happens.
But it's just reality. It
Yeah, I had
happens.
one of the customers coming up to me and saying, how can you improve our brand visibility? I was like, maybe I can, put you forward in front of the candidate well, etc., etc. But your brand visibility is actually you, and what you do to do that is what will improve it. It might be your overall engineering team now. Are they tech savvy enough? Are they writing about your engineering practices outside on the internet? I think that's very important. That is what will help you attract the right talent. It's nothing like a platform like us can improve your brand visibility, and I don't think any platform can do it. Even if LinkedIn, you can go ahead, create a company page, but if you don't utilize that functionality itself well as a brand, you don't have that visibility as a brand, right? So
No, so this is this is a problem that I've been working on. I've been like reflecting upon for the last couple of months, right? Which is employer branding specifically. And here, I mean, if you look up all of the available content on this, right? It's all tactical, right? I mean, LinkedIn page, and then organize some mixers and get people to write and so on and so forth. I feel like you need to find your authentic story, right?
100%.
Because the problem is that everyone who's doing all of those things, the LinkedIn page, the social media, the mixers, and so on and so forth, it's a dogfight out there, right? I don't believe that I can do it better than Razorpay, for example, right? I don't believe I can do it better than Microsoft even, right? So how am I going to differentiate with them, right? I mean, the only way I am going to stand out from this is by having an authentic story, right?
Yeah.
And I believe that every startup has an authentic story.
100%.
Right, on the engineering front, right? It's something you could have solved, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and you don't have to be like cutting edge AI, VR, and like blockchain and whatever the hell on top of that, right? I mean, you have an engineering story, right? And you have to identify the kernel of that story and then amplify that through all of these different means and so on.
Yeah.
And believe me, no matter how unique that story is, right, there are people who will be excited by that story.
Yeah.
If anything, I mean, they will be excited about the fact that, hey, I mean, they're being authentic about it.
Yeah.
Right. So
I mean, two things to that, right? I think LinkedIn pages, how interview would make your brand look like in front of a candidate, or how a Naukri page would look like for you. These are all mediums to express your thoughts, right? And you rightly said that you need to have your own unique story, or I'd like to call it that. Do you know your vision, mission, and your tagline today? And can you build a storyline around it? Or do you have an authentic story where you can then carve out a vision or a mission statement? Anyway, I mean, I think it's all about making sure that you don't use AI, ML, and a lot of those jargons, because your audience is not going to understand it a lot. They're going to connect to a story, connect to a problem statement that you might be solving, and how you're positioning yourself matters a lot, and everything else is just mediums to express that.
Yeah. So let's talk about you as a founder, right? I mean, you're building at a time when there's been a bit of a reset in SaaS, right? We're having to get used to things like profitability, right? I mean, I'm sure some old school folks are looking at us and laughing at this point, right? What are these guys even talking about, right? But it's not a go for broke, growth at all costs kind of a environment right now, right? I mean, we're looking at sustainable growth, profitability, and so on and so forth. How does that weigh on your mind when you're going out there and building your stuff?
I think that's a great mental model to have, honestly. I think startups' success, sure, you have to do a lot of things to get it right. There's a huge equation, but timing plays a huge role. And I think we are sitting in an industry where timing is, I would say, slightly off because of the kind of market it is. It's not really booming, especially hiring market, right? You see a lot of media, read a lot of media articles. You would see big tech is laying off. So many layoffs happened, and there'll be analytics around it, and so on and so forth. So investor sentiment, not only that, a lot of companies would, it goes for a toss, but a lot of companies would, freeze their hiring budgets. So, I told everybody in our organization, had the market not been this way, we would easily be, sitting north of, we would already have done our 1-2-5 journey already. And that would have happened pretty fast for us. Had the market been as good as it was in 2022, I'm not even talking about 2021, which was completely an outlier year, right? But I really think as a mental model, I think it's very important to think profitability from day zero. And when I say profitability, it's not like you are profitable every month. I don't know, totally depends on your startup. or the kind of business idea you have, but can you just make sure that you're thinking on those lines all the time, and you are optimizing your company around it, optimizing your OKRs around it, depending on the stage you are in, and making sure you always have a lean team. You don't spend on OKRs that are not needed. You don't spend on KPIs that are not needed. A lot of them are unnecessary, and there are top 2 or 3 problems only that you have to go after. And I think that's an interesting mental model. Definitely, I also think if the market is a certain way, and you are still in a mindset where you are growth at all costs, it is not going to get you anything, because you will end up burning more money, and the outcome is going to be as small as it was going to be had you thought about profitability first. So I think definitely a very from a foundational level, very good model to look at when you're building something.
Yeah, just a small tangent to kind of address this whole growth at all costs thing, right? I mean, I think post 2010, right? I think everything was modeled around this Uber / whatever,
grow,
equivalent.
put money, throw money, grow.
Yeah,
distribute.
basically winner takes all kind of markets, right?
Yeah.
And what we've realized, and perhaps 2021 was the peak of that, what we've realized is there aren't any winner takes all markets, right? Where you just go and get market share of like 60% or whatever, and then sit on it, and then they squeeze your customers to improve your margins and whatnot. That doesn't happen, especially in SaaS, right? SaaS is like so quickly commoditized, right? There are 50 tools for everything you can think of.
Yes.
Right. So building a sustainable business is the only way out, right? Innovating on product, and obviously like delivering great customer delight, I would say, not even service, right? But you as a founder, right? I mean, like at every leg of the journey, you'll have to sort of reinvent yourself.
Yeah, you don't have to just reinvent yourself, you reinvent the whole company.
Yeah.
And you were talking about Uber and all these companies. I really think companies that are big today, they have gone through this cycle before. It's not like 2023, 2024 has not happened before. 2000, if you remember, 2016 in India was a certain way, where a lot of hyper local startups,
all of them went bust.
They were all, they went under.
Yeah.
And then 2009 was a certain way, and before that, .com and everything. So these cycles repeat. Maybe twice in a decade it'll come. And every company who has made it big has gone through this cycle. Most of the companies, I won't say every company, it will be a wrong statement to make, but most of the companies that have made it big has gone through this cycle, and it's a true test of you being a founder. I think you as a founder, you really go into a cockroach mode where it's all about survival, etc. And sure, while you are surviving, I think you sow those seeds of success as well, because now you're thinking about your survival instinct increases, and you're thinking about more ways to make sure your product is relevant to the market still. And ultimately, when the market comes back, when it revives, you have more ways. Your customer has more reasons to buy your product. So I think that's very important. And your second question was,
how do you kind of reinvent yourself at every leg of the journey? Because I'm sure that you were a certain type when you started out, right? And in this 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 journey, you will have to be a different person, right? What are those things that you're like organically or inorganically trying to acquire and be different at?
I was very different when I was not a founder. Like I was an engineering manager, and my first year as a founder only taught me so much that I could not gather in the last, I would say, 8 years, 9 years as an engineer. It was very different and different set of challenges. So my whole idea was, how can I stay at the top of my game? There were 2 rules that I followed religiously. One was, I have to live and breathe my numbers and stay closer to the customer, right? So that's my first rule. Stay closer to the customer and see if it is translating to numbers. I have to live and breathe my numbers. If I'm flying, I'm in a plane, I'm in an airplane mode, I would open my MIS and just go through it and see what are the things that I might have missed. So that's my first rule. Second rule is, because of limited time and limited resources, there's only so much I can do. So where can I go and acquire more knowledge? So I started reading books, and books are all around business. I might have in the first year read about more than 50 books all around business, and started to apply them, because in 0 to 1 you are doing everything to get to that one, right? So I would read a book, and next day I would change my GTM strategy, or look at my MS and maybe I'm doing this wrong. So I would just question. And I think it's very important. Mental model that I have for this to reinvent is, I am very optimistic, but at the same time I am also uncertain that what will happen tomorrow. What is the next thing that will stop Intervue from growing? And that is what, make sure that I'm repeating these 2 steps over and over again. So it helps me reinvent myself. And if I am reinventing myself, it helps me look at interview as an org very differently all the time. And I would say in the last 3 years, although we are still early stage, interview as an org and how it operates has changed. I would say there's a drastic difference from first year to the second year, and has changed by 4 or 5 times easily.
What was the most difficult challenge for you?
I think doing a pivot was very, very hard. Finding those first set of interviewers and getting the team attuned to it. Hey, this we were building a software. Now we're suddenly on-demand interviews platform. So doing that pivot was pretty hard. There were a lot of my team came back. A lot of my sales folks, my engineering folks came back and said, "Hey, you know what? Why are we not doing that? That's more scalable." A lot of there was a person in my team who literally came to me with a TAM analysis. And said that it's as big an opportunity as your software was. So why are we doing this and all of that? So my homework was done pretty well, so I could answer all of those questions. But it was a pretty hard challenge, not just from a structural standpoint. It was more psychological than structural, because first of all, as a founder, you have hired a team who came in for a certain vision. Now you're pivoting and changing the vision midway when they're all hustling, grinding for 12-13 hours every day, and you just change the vision. So you have to make sure that you articulate it right. You articulate it to the dot, and you're fully transparent with your team. I think that's very important. You're laying down that foundation. I think that was pretty hard to do. Second thing that was hard to do was, we went from a phase where we touched almost 2 million in revenue, but then it dropped because of the way market was, and then it started rising again. But that from the drop to that rise, there was a dip, and that dip was not like for 2 or 3 days. It was for good 8-9 months, and in those 8-9 months, we had so much to figure out. We were like, okay, it's going down. How much down will it go? And we were acquiring customers, but suddenly ticket sizes shrink. And a lot of things happen in that. And, in the dip itself, overcoming the dip and running fast through the dip so that we go to the next stage was pretty hard. So that mindset, strong mindset was pretty important there.
Right. Actually, let's talk about that, right? I mean, recruitment is cyclical, right?
Yeah,
I mean, good times, everyone hires in great numbers.
Yeah.
And then, of course, anytime the market turns, and the first thing people look to optimize is on the people costs, right?
Yeah.
And every year or so, the pink papers kind of publish how many people TCS is hiring or not hiring, and so on and so forth, and assumes everything is downstream from that, right? Basically, in terms of demand.
Yeah.
How are you looking to hedge on that?
So first of all, there are 2 mental models that I have, and which are also true, backed by data. One is first mental model is recruitment is cyclical, for sure. But can I make sure that in the nitty-gritties, can I carve out a GTM strategy where it is not cyclical? Because it's not cyclical everywhere. It's like saying that, or maybe if I just compare Uber, right, for a second, with this sort of analogy, I would say people at railway station or bus stands or airports would request more Ubers as opposed to, or maybe certain hours would have more Uber requests, etc., as opposed to maybe a tier 3 city, for that matter. So Uber also has their concentration where maybe 80 or 90% of their revenues would be coming from. So it has more depth to it than just a statement where we say recruitment is cyclical. I think it is cyclical in some companies, but in some companies, if you go higher up in the hierarchy, companies like Accenture, where the attrition itself is 10%. And if you take 10% of Accenture, it's enough hiring that they're doing, right? So you have to just identify from a GTM perspective. That's one take, right? The second take as a founder that I have of this is, I really think that in any market, you have to identify certain parameters basis which, and we can go all technical about it, basis which you define your right customer, right? And you have to identify that by staying closer to the customer itself. Now, if you think your product or your sort of an offering is maybe time bound or kind of need based, etc., and you might not be able to get perennial revenue out of it, I think you need to be closer to the customer and develop those features for them which can make it perennial ultimately, because maybe your former feature can be a great acquisition bit and your customer might stay for something else, but you have to identify by staying closer to the customer. So yeah, I mean that's my take on it.
Yeah, no, long term, I think the only solution is to increase your TAM, right? And that happens, I think, sort of organically as well. I mean, if I look back at our own journey over the last 6-7 years, I mean, it's been pretty much like that, right? You carve out a little piece of the market that is underserved, and then expand from there. And that argument you can make for pretty much any successful or scaled company, for sure, right?
Yeah, I mean, there was a quote that I read somewhere. It said, if you're building everything for everyone before building something for someone, you'll end up becoming nothing for no one. Yeah, so you have to build.
That's pretty apt.
Yeah, so you have to start for a very specific use case and then slowly and steadily expand.
Right.
When your resource bandwidth and so many other factors allow.
Right.
If you're doing it all, you'll not end up becoming a product itself.
Right.
You'll just end up becoming maybe a shop which is selling all the things and not doing anything well. Right. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned 50 plus books and whatnot, right? So we ask all the founders who appear on the podcast, to give their recommendations. What would your top 3 or top 4 books be?
I think The Mom Test is a great book because the very first book that I read, I would never forget it because that is how I landed my funding as well. It taught me how powerful cold emails can actually get. So Mom Test is a great book. It teaches you how to talk to a customer properly, how to read between lines. The essence of the book is that if you go and ask your mom that, are you doing good in your life or are you good looking, etc., she'll always say yes. And that's not how you talk to your customers. Right. So that's the essence of the book. It's a pretty good book. Very few pages. Someone who's an avid reader would finish it in 2 to 3 hours only. It's a good book. Second book that I would recommend is Psychology of Money. Pretty good book, and that is what helps you understand the mindset behind money. I think it's also apt for startup founders because ultimately we all run behind value generation, right? And if we are all running behind value generation, that book has very important takeaway where they've analyzed generations over generation and how they look at money, and how how this current generation is going to kill it because they don't have prior baggages. And that changes the way you look at certain things, right? Because as founders, we are not able to take certain calls because we are bound by a certain thing, or we have a baggage, etc., etc. I think that can all the book changes your perspective on that.
I gifted that book just last week to someone. So.
Oh, you did? Oh, you've read that book? Great.
Yeah. I mean, I've gifted it quite a few times, but just last week, I mean, I gave it to one person.
Yeah, so that's one. Then there's another book. I don't exactly remember the name of the book. Maybe it's Don't Shoot the Dog or something. I don't know.
Never split the difference.
Amazing book. I think when I started doing sales literally it was, for me, it was a huge shift from being an engineer to becoming a founder and I have to do sales, right? I think negotiation was an important part, and it not only just teaches you negotiation, it teaches you how to make sure that you're building that credibility and trust in front of the other person. And the whole essence of the book is, if you are in a negotiation, would you be a 50-50, or can you literally win the deal? And how to do that. It underlines very important principles. It has been written by a former FBI negotiator. Pretty insane book, right? And then there's a book called Addiction by Design. I think must read for product managers. Crazy book. I would say it's quite lengthy, but great book, great insights, very analytical. So some of the books top of my mind.
When do you find time to read?
Honestly, it's funny, but I read when I have to go to sleep, or in the bathroom now. In my bathroom, I have actually made
a book rack of sorts.
I have. There's no other time. And that is where I would just read, and I won't take my devices inside. So that's how it is.
Nice. That's a pretty awesome tip. So what do you have coming up in the next year to 18 months that you're really excited by?
I think I'm really excited about expanding the horizon of Intervue to serve more profiles. I think that's pretty important. We launched as a long tail model where we thought, can we launch with 10 profiles that we can do well? And when I say profiles and profiles that we can do well, there are people coming and asking us, can you take marketing interviews? And then people coming us and asking us, can you take HR interviews? And I'm like, sure, we can start it tomorrow, but if we are not able to do justice today to it,
what is the value add?
There's no value add because I'll be as good as what you're doing today, and I don't want to do that. So for us, launching a profile is a pretty big process. We have to get vetted interviewers. Not only that, the first part is a lot of data that goes into making a profile. And can we do it better than, let's say you are today hiring a marketer, can I make better data points to assess a marketer than your own company, which might have spent not as much time as me, But can I use that data to tell you that I will be able to assess a marketer better than your own team? So that's our first thing that we do. So I'm very excited about launching more profiles. It'll expand our interviews horizon. Very excited about, there are a couple of features that we are bringing in for college folks, where they can come and talk to an industry expert, take a mock interview.
Nice.
It's already live, but we are building more nitty-gritties to it. So that's what I'm excited about. Third is, very excited about improving our quality parameters to a point where I continue to tell in every call with a customer, I tell them that the average ratio that you will get after let's say we recommend 10 candidates, after interviewing them, you'll end up maybe selecting 5 to 6 out of them. We are continually tweaking our internal product itself to make sure can we take it to a 7 or 8. That'll be killer. So yeah, some of the things that we're building.
Yeah, pretty interesting, man. I feel like in the recruitment business, right? And this is something that, I told you that I've operated in recruitment for 4 years before as well. It's just very important to get beyond HR to engineering and business, right? HR is great at what HR does, but I do feel like, if you have an impact on engineering and business, it's a lot more sustainable, right? I mean, ultimately everything adds up to that, right? And so pretty awesome.
Tell me the last time that you went to an HR and the HR said, what should be the JD for this? And then you would, speak out some jargons that this is the kind of person I need. And then the HR would note it down and pick up a template, collate the two and put a job post online. That's how most of the hiring is. Yeah. Most of the phone screen that the HR person would do would be around that template that they would have created. That is where it completely loses the plot.
So believe me, I have a lot of thoughts on HR specifically, right? Because I spent 4 years of my life selling to HRs, probably had like thousands of conversations and so on and so forth. I think some of the problems, right, are beyond people and persona. It's a systemic issue, right? I think at some level, HR is so disconnected from business, right? And I mean, how it is, right? I mean, feedback with reality is the biggest, determinant of how evolved you will be, right? Yeah. I mean, how effective you will be, how smart you will be, how whatever else you will be, right? So it's a larger systemic issue, I feel. But yeah, I mean, if you are able to impact engineering and product and business, right? I mean, nothing like it, right? Nobody will kind of like question your place in the entire scheme of things. Actually.
Correct. Yeah. No, I totally agree. I remember a lot of hiring that we have done in the past, and JDs that have been made, and if you ever are hiring for let's say marketing, right, and maybe Google Analytics is one of the tools that you use, would you ever go in an interview and assess somebody on Google Analytics?
Yeah.
I mean, you know what I mean, right?
Correct.
And most of the JDs would say Google Analytics, tools like Google Analytics. Yeah. And I remember talking to some of the customers where HR would come and say that, hey, can the candidate be tested on this particular tool? And I would go and tell them that this is not what your hiring manager needs. Your hiring manager needs something else, because and your interview process itself is structured a certain way because they don't need this.
Yeah.
And now, building for that sort of a market is pretty hard, because you have not only have to read the customer between lines, but you need to have a lot of knowledge of the details, finer details.
Yeah, and small consolation, right? I mean, I just like a white flag, I think the best HRs, the most successful ones, are able to do that. Right?
Yeah, I have seen those HRs. They're pretty smart.
Yeah.
Bang on. I've done actually a lot of calls with those HRs as well, where they would be rock solid.
No, I see, if you look at startup building, right? What are you doing? You're just putting a bunch of people together towards a mission.
Yeah.
Right. So people is like pretty much everything in that. Right?
Yeah.
So it can be like a huge lever if you get that right. Yeah. Hey, this is a fascinating conversation. I mean, I share the same passion as you about, maybe not to that extent, right, that I'll start a company or whatever, but a lot of, say, mutual interests and passions. We can talk about this, till the cows come home, but I understand you're on a schedule. So thanks so much for making the time. I really appreciate it. And I think there's a lot that people can learn from your experience, and wish you all the very best for everything that you have coming up.
Thanks a lot. Thank you for having me.
Awesome.
I don't know if I was able to pass on, any value to your audience.
No,
but whatever my journey has been.
I'm sure. I mean, there's a lot that people can reflect on for sure. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, folks. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Startup Operator Podcast. If you liked this content, don't forget to share, subscribe, tell your friends, family maybe. right? I'll see you on another episode with another interesting founder. Thank you.